Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I know it's been a little bit longer than in the past breaks between meetings, but it's great to see everyone again. So starting with our plan for our little bit over an hour we have together today. After we get settled, we'll go over the results of our last meeting, which was with Provost Schultz and Vice Chancellor Kramer. We'll touch on some of the successes since that time, before transitioning to the full group discussions around our two key action items, kind of staging our recommendations and this kind of idea of defining sustainability for UW-Madison. At the end, we'll touch on communications before wrapping up with next steps. I see a chat coming in, but all right, no worries, Sarah. Okay, so I think there are many familiar faces on the screen today, but there are a few new SAC members for this year. So I wanted to take a moment to welcome Ashley Chung, our new ASM representative, as I think officially welcome Jocelyn Milner from Academic Planning and Institutional Research, and Jason King from Athletics. While Micah Williams is no longer our at-large undergraduate student on the council, we are lucky that Natalie was willing to take on that position and continue with us for another year. Finally, in terms of kind of the composition of the council, I'll note quickly that Jacob Dolence has recently left the university, so we are working with University Staff Congress on getting a new representative from them. And while they are not joining us today, I do want to acknowledge that the student subcommittee is continuing for this year and has welcomed, I think, about 5 new members. Just want to put that out there for everyone as well. All right, so digging in for today. So if you can remember back to August, when we met with the provost and the VCFA, we got some, at that time, good support for kind of the volume and the detail of the work that we produced over our first year of time together. And while they acknowledged that they needed some more time, I think, to dive into the details and better understand how our recommendations can be implemented. I think since then, they our sponsors completed some additional review and provided an email, which I think hopefully everyone on here saw, summarizing their feedback, where they asked that we more clearly kind of stage the initiatives as a way, I think, to both identify what quick wins could be and set up kind of what action groups need to form now, but focus on planning to better kind of scope future endeavors, and then which are kind of more longer term opportunities. They also asked that we develop a definition for sustainability, not in general, but for the context of UW-Madison. So while that was a bit over 2 months ago at this point, and we will spend the bulk of our time together today discussing those requests, we wanted to at least take a moment to highlight some of the work that has continued over these past few months, advancing sustainability across the university. So a few of what could be considered quick wins here that we wanted to highlight that touch a lot of the areas that y'all work in. One is the completion of the largest solar energy generation facility in Dane County, which is both a collaboration with UW-Madison, a couple other local entities, and MG&E, but also available for kind of teaching and touring learning space for students. Many of you may have also seen the Sustainability Culture and Literacy Survey that was released earlier this semester. There's also some work with Mark Guthier and his team to designate the Office of Sustainability as a sponsor for interested student organizations, and some recognition of kind of past successes with the school being recognized as a Green Ribbon school, received a Fair Trade University designation, and becoming a founding member of the Midwest Climate Collaborative. I also want to call out some of the great work of some of the sustainability student interns continuing their Amplifying BIPOC Voices in Sustainability series and their Sustain UW podcast. In addition to kind of these wins, we've also continued some existing planning efforts. So including conducting and asking for a brief kind of third-party review of the draft recommendations that we had put together over the past year. That review very nicely kind of echoed the same kind of feedback we heard from our sponsors, as well as calling out and the focus that we had in there around diversity, engagement, inclusion, and wellness, particularly as that's growing more important in the field of sustainability. The Nelson Institute, with a lot of great work by Andrea here on the call, held a sustainability workshop earlier this semester, bringing together faculty from across the university to discuss sustainability related teaching and learning opportunities. We began a zero waste action group, continued work towards the Chancellor's resilience commitment, and recently began kind of the next data collection efforts for our STARS reporting. So I just dove right in quickly here at the top of this meeting. So my first chance to pause and ask one if there's any questions on kind of where we stand from sponsor comments or any other successes or things that people wanted to highlight that have accomplishments or otherwise over the past couple months.
Well, I'll just say I'm impressed. Thank you for sharing this with us. It's great to hear good news. My reaction to this is, and maybe we get so many newsletters, but has this all been like packaged and promoted, or is it in the the weekly or the Inside UW and that type of thing, or did it come about in little pieces and it just looks impressive when it's all together? I mean, these are impressive anyway, but so yeah, help me understand that. How do we tell this story? So yeah.
Can I do the fun thing of pointing to Nathan?
I was just waiting to unmute, Alex. Mark, great question. And I would say there's been several ways in which we've gotten this material out there. We have our own newsletter, as you may or may not know, that comes out monthly. And so we're always featuring, any of this relevant material would show up in that newsletter. We do have a relationship with UCOM, and so some of the material would come out in campus newsletters, though certainly not all. It kind of depends on what they deem most worthy of the things that we send them, and we're being a little bit selective there. We also produced a annual report, which I will grab and drop into the chat in a second, which is a little longer than our usual, hence annual, and it's sort of a 4-page, 2 back-to-back, just like highlights from across the university. And so not everything will be captured in that because we produced that at the thank you, Jake. We produced that in early fall, late summer, and so some of these things have happened since then. But that's a long way of saying there's a few different routes for this material to come out, in addition to social media and so on. We don't have an SAC specific kind of channel other than through you all at this point.
Well, I would encourage you to continue to package it like this for the advisory council, because we have the opportunity to like speak on your behalf or just mention when someone said, I wonder if UW-Madison is doing anything on sustainability, right? And so thank you for putting it all together like this for us and making sure we're seeing this in its collective. So appreciate that. So.
That's actually a great tie to one of our last items around communications, about how to support you all in that. So we're thinking in the right way. Anything else from anyone? Otherwise, we'll dive into kind of our first topic of discussion. All right. So let's get into I think both the first ask from our sponsors and what will be our kind of first discussion topic for today, which is around this idea of staging our recommendations. So again, we were asked to identify, I think, what are quick wins, and if we think about a time frame, maybe what's our like 1 year kind of time frame or potential. What are some of those midterm or 5-year goals? Basically, what are those action groups that maybe, even if they're starting now, their efforts are more focused on planning and refining scopes for later endeavors. And then what are the future or maybe 10-year kind of horizon type opportunities? So I'm going to take a few minutes here to run through how we went about taking a first stab at this. But I want to kind of at least say now that kind of after that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan, who will lead for all of us staying together in one big group to discuss kind of how this has been presented, if it provides clarity, thoughts on keys to success or challenges or anything that feels off at this point. It's very much a draft, and I'm looking for any thoughts or feedback as we hold this together. So in thinking about how to address this, we wanted to start at the top level, right? Align kind of however we stage this to our evaluation metrics, which really at the institutional level is our STAR score. I think more specifically, how do we chart a path to achieving the highest STARS rating? In this case, is platinum. So if you remember back to our process last year, we use STARS as a framework for the collection of the ideas that were formulated kind of ultimately into our recommendations. So I think we're in a really good spot to ensure that quick wins we pursue, action items that we stand up, both meaningfully advance sustainability based off of our discussions over this past year, while reflecting and contributing to our improvement in our STAR scoring. But how do we do that? With this super simple thing, right? Please forgive the eye chart nature of this, but we wanted to try and show, at least in one spot, kind of what was both a formulation of our recommendations that we had discussed over this past year, and this idea of, advancing culture, purpose, and practice through an association of 9 or so action groups. Here, all kind of in this first column. And then what could those quick wins be in the numbers here, aligned with kind of their topic areas, and what those quick wins are defined at the bottom. And then the timeline, both for kind of formally kicking off an action group, which again would be a collection of some subject matter experts from across campus, to further refine and scope out some future activities, and ultimately thinking about maybe not an end to an action group, but more of how do these action groups complete some of the initial ideas we have and transition into the longer term opportunities. So I'll dig into each one of these areas a little bit more here. So in the section around culture, the thought here would be to focus on quick wins in the area of integrating sustainability into our culture, but the action groups, being stood up to support those quick wins, as well as another action group around working on social sustainability processes and opportunities. I think if they are successful, they would end, but really kind of transition into our leadership working group, which is kind of the idea of how do we help push our successes we hopefully have here on campus out to peers, up through the state, and better recognize all those successes. And I will say that I know there's a lot on these slides, so this was sent out beforehand, and I did send another note about 10 minutes or so, the PDF version of this, in case it's easier for you to look at it at your own pace, or not squint at my screen if it's not coming through big enough for you. In the area of purpose, we saw some quick win opportunities in kind of the learning space, but thinking about getting action groups up and off the ground in learning and research, which would be focused on opportunities to improve processes for kind of tracking and reporting, but also growing perhaps research opportunities or course development support opportunities. Like in culture, I think the idea is if these first ones are successful, they would transition into the third one, which here at the top, this distinctive home idea, or something like planning for or setting up a sustainability institute. Finally, in the kind of our practice space, continue the work of the zero waste group, kind of transition the work for the resilience commitment towards a formal carbon neutrality action group, and have a sustainability facilities and infrastructure group, which would start to primarily set up some processes around new building design and some building management, take a pause, and then evaluate after a year or two here whether those processes are still successful, come back together and evaluate that at that point. Now, surprisingly, that's a lot based off of everything that we've talked about this past year. And we do imagine that we'll be asking for a little bit of help from the folks on this call here. So in addition to your support, guidance, and oversight in your position here on the SAC, I know you all come with both 3 or 4 other jobs, but also a ton of expertise. And so there are a few specific areas we'd like to lean on you a bit for support with, from guidance on both kind of how to set up and execute on some of these quick wins, but also thinking about the best way to set up a successful action group. I'll also note here that we do envision the student subcommittee members to serve at least one student or part 1 or 2 to serve on each action group to make sure that the student voice is present throughout this whole process. I think more than anything right now, me putting this up here is call it a sneak peek, call it a friendly warning on one of the next steps, which is that we'll be reaching out to do maybe some one-on-one conversations here over the next couple months to dive in a little bit more of the details and get your thoughts and feedback on how to be successful in these areas. So that's where I was going to pause in terms of the overview and hand it off to Nathan to lead us through some discussion questions. But maybe I will ask first if there are any clarifying questions or anything I've gone over.
Can you spend a little more time explaining what my name means on that slide?
Sure. So,
holy camole.
That's a great question, Mark. Our thought here is, I think, especially from my personally, what I've seen is that you all come with a ton of great experience in a lot of different areas across campus. But from what at least from what we think, we know where you have specific roles or expertise in some of the potential projects that are aligned to these areas. So the ask is if we'll steal a little bit of your time over the next couple months for one of these one-on-one discussions to put forward kind of, hey, we think we're going to set up this action group. Who are some people you think would be good to bring into it? How would it be successful to frame that and get kind of participation from the right subject matters on campus? And as we think about what there may be quick win projects, are there people, places, or resources that y'all have that would say, hey, you should talk to this person, you should look at this thing that exists and build off of that as we think about kind of the implementation piece? Does that help? It's kind of still a continuation of the type of guidance we're looking for here, but probably going to force a little bit more detail on you.
Yeah, what I didn't hear you say is chair the action group. So am I, is that accurate, or did you just not want to say that out loud? I didn't know what that meant.
Sorry, what do you mean by share the action?
Chair. Like
chair. Oh, chair, yes.
Yeah, you'll solicit feedback about who to put on the action group, the
Yeah.
types of quick wins they could have, but are we chairing the action group or something?
We had not planned on that. No, we thought that in your role in the
all
SAC.
right.
With that said, we would ask for your help in identifying a good chair and where appropriate, gently nudging someone who might be a good chair.
Got it. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Sorry for beating around that one.
Yes, Missy, I know.
Cheryl, I saw your hand go up, but was that the question that Mark just asked?
Mark had a really excellent question. And so I think he covered that very well. And I'll just add, Mark, I think what they're saying is you're an expert. So you're on the spot for being an expert. No, I'm sure we're all glad to help, and thanks for taking the pressure off of the chairship.
I'm sure we'll find other ways to put some pressure on you in a nice way. Well, Nathan, do you want to get into some of the other specific questions we had?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, briefly, before we start the discussion, one thing I wanted to kind of say is um, a way that you might consider interpreting our feedback from the sponsors is, this is all good stuff, and we need a little bit more guidance on how you see this happening and sort of what would be the sequence of steps that we would take. And I think that Alex laid that out really well. I think, the material is not changing drastically. It's more about how we're talking about it and how we're making it clear to them and to, ultimately the university community, what we're doing, when we're doing it, what it's going to entail. So I think that hopefully will help set the stage for this part of the discussion, where we are looking for you to provide us some feedback. A little scary for us. These are complicated ideas to try to stick in a few slides, and you saw that there is some complexity there. But what we're hoping to find out, kind of first and foremost, and I'll basically walk us through these questions, is, does the staging that as we've laid it out, provide clarity, or maybe we should say sufficient clarity, on how to implement our recommendations, both from your seats, and then I suppose insofar as you can imagine yourself in the seats of Carl Schultz and Rob Kramer as well. And since we're a big open group, we hope that this would help us move this conversation along a little more efficiently if everybody was here. But I would invite people to jump right in. I will also look for hands and so on. And you do have your PDF that Alex sent around, and Alex can easily click through the pages here as we go.
I don't always want to be the first one, but so I answer yes. It provides clarity from my perspective. Thinking back to the report, and then seeing the quick wins identified and then mapped out. And I like the fact it also demonstrates how this might help us move from silver to gold to platinum, right? And that some of these are, I think this is a good, once you digest it, you begin to understand, oh, this is a 2-year initiative. This is a 18-month initiative. This is planned to be for 3 years, right? So I think that's all great. So yes. Does it provide clarity? Yes, for me it does. So
I agree, and I appreciate. I keep looking over here to look at my screen where I have the bigger version. I really appreciate seeing it laid out this way, but also the articulation of the quick win initiatives and having you see this with particular action items rather than saying, okay, there's going to be these work groups and there you go. I think I think it'll be important to continue to have the Office of Sustainability assert priorities from your point of view. I mean, you all are really, really good about getting input and collaboration and engagement from participants, but ultimately, I feel like you're the experts and you know both what the quick wins and the highest gains are and what we have capacity to do. So I'll just add putting a note in that you continuing to articulate and assert the direction of the work groups, I think will be valuable.
Thanks to you both. Jocelyn, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm not sure what your culture is about calling on people or whatever. So if you, a lot of groups I use the raised hand, so hope that's okay.
Great.
I think that this is really helpful. Just thinking back to the full document, I think this is a distillation. And I know that one of the other topics, I don't know if it, at some point I thought I saw it on the agenda for today, was to talk about the definition. I'm not sure if that's still on the agenda, but I think it's still a lot of nuance and detail to hook people. I mean, I think this is all exciting and important, and I wondered if you had talked about sort of turning it the other way and starting with sort of it just seems like it's sort of still like a list, and it's not clear what is urgent. And the moving to the gold and platinum is a consequence, but maybe it's not the urgent thing or the exciting thing or the motivating thing. And so I'm wondering if you in your group have talked about presenting this more through that kind of lens.
May I ask before maybe Alex and Missy jump in here, although I'm happy to offer thoughts. When you say presenting it, do you mean presenting it to the campus community? Do you mean the sponsors, anybody?
And I think maybe partly I'm looking at this, my name is beside that learning thing, and having the experience with some of the work we've tried to do there. And there's it's been hard to get people hooked in because there's a lot of words. And, I just offer that observation. I think this looks great. But I think it's easy still for it to maybe not generate the kind of excitement that the work is worthy of.
I'll just jump in. We have been having those conversations, Jocelyn, and we've moved this around, and it's really why we wanted your feedback, right? Because we struggle with it, and we talk about definition a lot, and especially in higher ed, the semantics can really bog you down in that conversation. So I get a little cringy when we start talking about definition, but I think we've come up with something that will help define this. But I think your point about, is this the wow and everything people can get behind and understand, right? Understanding what the mission is, that's something is very spot on. So thank you.
I think from kind of a communications standpoint too, this, I wouldn't suggest that this is a document we intend to kind of foreground and put out in the world in a really big way. I think what we would be focusing on are probably the focus areas along the left column there as being sort of the big picture things that we're creating as part of our strategy. So we're going to, integrate sustainability across campus in such and such a way. But also that, so we might start from both, you suggested flipping it, which I think is a really interesting idea. And I think probably what I would maybe offer is we would come from both directions. We'd almost like skip all the stuff in the middle, and we'd more be like, this is what we're doing, these big things, and here's some exciting examples of how that's going to play out, which are the quick win action-y item things at the bottom of this page. And a lot of the sequencing piece and in all of that is sort of detailed more for the sponsors to know, to understand that we've basically thought this out. Because all this information was there in the report, as you know, and I think what they saw was some kind of vague ideas combined with a lot of very specific ideas. And though we attempted to create a kind of to suture those together via the action groups, that process wasn't clear enough. And so part of what we're doing here is trying to kind of make clear that process. I'm not sure if the rest of our team agrees with me there. And Mark has his hand up too.
Yes, and for the provost and Rob Kramer, I can see where this is. I would think this is what they were looking for, something like this that shows them how the things are moving us forward. But to Jocelyn's point, what I think I heard maybe is that rather than this, because right now the obvious conclusion is that we get to platinum, as opposed to we get to our definition of a sustainable campus, or our realization of a sustainable future, right? So if the end point is something aspirational as opposed to platinum, maybe that gives it its wow. I don't know. I just offer that as a. So.
That's a great point, and a really nice evolution. And I'm looking at the chat here. So Cheryl saying what sustainability is and is not will help inform our community. And we will go talk about that shortly. And also what Alex was suggesting about color coding. I think that's a great call. Deb also reminded in a separate message that we had talked about potentially having a graphic designer try to communicate this as well in a less wordy way. So we have a couple more questions in this discussion to touch on. I'm wondering if anyone has any other big points they'd like to make about the sort of structure of this way of talking about the recommendations. Cheryl?
I'm still trying to formulate my question here, but I'm noticing on the legend, the two circles sort of denote a beginning and an ending of a particular action or frame. Is there any truth in that? That you could sort of frame social sustainability with a start like we have achieved?
We figured this question was coming, and I think it's an excellent question. I know Alex has a nice way of responding to this, but I think our thought was these are periods of time where we're kicking something off and then handing it off to something else often, or setting up systems that are hopefully going to be working perpetually, and then we'll have to figure out a system for checking in on them or something like that. But absolutely, the idea is not that we can achieve social sustainability on campus in 2.5 years. Alex, do you have anything else you want to say there?
I think you summed it up pretty well, Nathan. I think this is maybe idealistic start and ends to action groups, but the work that comes out of it or the work that's behind it is probably not going to end at these time periods. And the goal, if their action groups are successful, is that they set up processes, systems, or things that probably still need management, still need checking in on, that keep the work going outside of it.
And before we get to Sarah, just a quick point. One of the reasons we didn't just start everything on the left and have it be a perpetual arrow is because we knew that that would scare the sponsors. And to some extent, that's probably how they saw the initial report, as kick off all these action groups and we'll just do stuff forever. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. Thinking a little bit about what Jocelyn raised and Mark commented on, I found myself returning to advocating for something I have said probably throughout this process, that as we continue to work, I think it's great that we have distilled down to the culture, purpose, practice, and also to the 9 kind of larger initiative areas. But I do think it would be helpful, maybe it's a subgroup, an internal work group, to really think about the messaging from an external point of view, and really coming up not with a mission or a purpose statement, but with a value proposition. What is the stop, drop, and roll of these sustainability things? What is the brush your teeth twice a day? What can we all say in one phrase that will knit and pull all 3 culture, purpose, practice, and all 9 of these initiatives and these work groups together to say, yep, John Horn and I have our names next to carbon neutrality, which rolls up into blah for this initiative for campus. So I continue to advocate for that little bit more, PR, marketing, branding, statement, value proposition piece. Okay, thanks.
Love that point, and I'm already going to preemptively apply it to our later conversation about communications. Well, I think everyone should feel free to continue to mull over this, and as we go forward, if there's anything that's urgent that you want to say about the kind of bigger picture here, please feel free to bring it up. Alex, do you want to drop in the second question in the chat? Also, feel free to ping me if our time is getting short here. So we're also looking for your collective expertise on the factors that might contribute to the success of this approach, as you think logistically, strategically, administratively. philosophically about kind of undertaking this, kicking off these action groups, thinking in terms of these timescales and so forth. Is there anything that you think we should be keeping in the forefront of our minds? Since, as you all know, I think the Office of Sustainability is going to be project managing pretty much this whole thing, but we'll be looking for champions and subject matter experts and chairs and so on to be doing a lot of the work too. Sarah.
One thing that pops to mind is for each of the work groups to have or to develop an objective statement for the work group. So in the materials, you describe what the group will do, the tactics or examples of some of the activities, but I think centering each work group on an objective will be valuable. Maybe part of it is you want each work group to develop their own objective, but I might suggest that as the experts, for each of them, you say, this is your primary objective, and then build out strategies and tactics from that. Have that be the task of the work group to build out viable strategies and tactics to your objective.
Great stuff. Thank you, Sarah. I think I saw another hand go up. Mark.
I know we're already 2 months into the academic year, but so maybe this is an idea for next year. But I don't know how often you're planning to have interactions with the sponsors. But I know if I were leading or chairing or helping to make sure a work group was successful, and I knew that I had to give an interim report to the provost right in December, and then a final report in May, I'd probably make sure the group was actually meeting and working, right? So, but I don't know if they've committed only to meeting with us once a year, but I'd hate for us to all hurry around after spring break and try to get something done because, the meeting with the provost is coming, right? So.
Yep, that's another great point. Thank you. Yep, and Sarah's now volunteering you. Ashley, please jump in.
Hi, everyone. First of all, happy to see you all and be here. I would definitely say that one thing that comes to mind when thinking about contributing to the success of this is definitely outside accountability and involvement from students and a clear understanding and communication of what's going on and what the different groups are working on and that kind of thing, and keeping students involved and in the loop in this so that they can feel included in the conversation and also feel like they have an input, so that students are able to kind of keep the initiative going, if that makes sense.
That makes excellent sense. Thank you. Yeah, and as Alex said too, I think the student subcommittee will be, involved throughout, and obviously the student members of the SAC. But I think what you're saying too is just a larger community of students, and that can be part of our communications as well as how we go about executing the action groups, hopefully. Well, we should move on to the final question here, and thence to our definition. So you want to drop that in, Alex? So I think, this is kind of inherent to any of these conversations. You've all have possibly started touching on this, but final piece is, what challenges might we face in implementing this approach? And of course, if you have any ideas about how we would overcome those challenges, we would greatly appreciate it. Go ahead, Ashley.
I feel like the first thing that comes to mind is just the idea of keeping on track with this schedule and kind of keeping in mind what are the forces that will be sort of pushing us to make sure that we're like staying on track with this, and making sure that things are moving along even when it doesn't seem like there's anything that can be done. Like, I guess, for example, like within the time period of the last meeting and then this meeting, like making sure that things are still happening, I guess, and just ensuring that there's like continuous momentum is definitely going to be a challenge.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand, so I don't know if anybody else has their hand raised, but I had another thought. No, I don't know if I heard this. Maybe I heard this from this group, that projects fail at the beginning, not at the end. And I have always admired how well you guys prep and prep us and structure things. I would just, in addition to being really clear about objectives of work groups, that either you provide or provide a framework for how the work groups will be, as Ashley so aptly pointed out, what are the accountabilities and what are the success measures? And knowing that up front, I think will let the group work nimbly and apply effort most effectively for what they're working toward. So so that, and just where possible, eliminate thrashing around, keeping the balance between getting input and engagement from work group members, but in a focused, direct way so that you can use talents efficiently, and not leave stuff to chance.
No thrashing work groups. Cheryl, we'll go to you and then we should move on to the definition, but please go ahead.
Okay, this question I'm going to pose may fit into either this particular prompt or the one before. Have we identified how you all will interact or engage with each of the work groups? Because I think that's going to be a helpful clarifier or indicator of how we'll.
Do you mean each of us?
Yeah, like
each
you.
of us individually? Yeah, I think we have tentatively kind of stuck our names next to some of these. Missy and Alex, do you have additional thoughts there?
Yeah, our current thought is that we would have an OS staff kind of project manage the work groups, and Deb as well from the Office of Strategic Consulting it would help kind of project manage all of them together, help make sure they're all being in a consistent manner. So we would support the chair, who would still be kind of the lead, the face, the making sure things are getting done, but we would be the resource to help make sure progress is being made and there's consistency, and probably more importantly, where there's potential collaboration, or this group's already talking about something that's similar.
Okay, that's excellent. And I think that'll help sort of move progress along and also help us address any challenges, knowing that your expertise is always in the room.
And I believe we're not talking quite 16 action groups. It's more like 9-ish or maybe 7, depending on how you count it. So nevertheless, I think the question of staff resources is very relevant. And I'm not sure I can speak at all definitively about whether we do or not at this stage. That's a good question. All right, let's move on to the definition. Though, of course, please feel free to send us notes, emails, or anything else about further thoughts you have on this, especially because you have a PDF version. All righty, so we took a shot at, oh, I'm sorry, Alex, you were going to talk on this. You've got your good points on this one. You go ahead. I'll get out of the way for a second.
I'll be quick. So this the kind of last item for discussion today is this very much a draft of what sustainability means, kind of in the context here of UW-Madison. We attempted to pull this from existing work. This is not out of thin air. So we've talked about it in the past, but there was a 2010 Sustainability Task Force, which touched on a lot of these ideas. UW system has a sustainability group and they have a mission statement. So there's some good language pulled from that. And looking at peer institutes and the way they've gone about this to pull this together. With that being said, we know this is long and this is not maybe an ideal way to define a term. There's a lot of words to define one word here, but we at least hope it's reflective of the work that we've done over this past year. And I think probably most importantly, is it in some way instructive for how we could implement the recommendations. But that's my only spiel, Nathan. I'll turn it back to you.
Sure. Well, Cheryl's got her hand up. So go ahead, Cheryl. Initial thought.
My initial thought, even without reading, is just being really clear onto what end, like when we're defining sustainability, it just always seems so broad that it's like you're always there or you're never there. And are we really clear on sort of seeing a vision of what it means for us to achieve a sustainable campus or sustainability? And I always feel like something's missing that helps us know you have arrived, you've landed.
Well, that's kind of setting up our discussion a little bit here. And to kind of cheat ahead, what I think we're asking you all in considering this definition is, can we live with this kind of for now? Can we live with this insofar as it serves as a working definition that we will use in conversation with our sponsors and as a kind of source document to some extent for the work of the action groups? We've actually resisted defining sustainability for years now as an office. We had a previous director who basically said it was not possible to do so. And I think many people would probably agree. And in the report, if you paid attention to this section when we talked about defining sustainability, what we basically did was point elsewhere and say, go look over there. That they've got some definitions, here's some definitions. And by the way, all of these definitions should account for a couple of other things that maybe is not explicit there. And so in creating this one, and then I'll get to the hands, we were trying to, one of the pushbacks on sustainability is often that it includes too much or it's too vague. And unfortunately, to some extent, our answer to that is yes, it does, right? It is supposed to be a kind of holistic world system. And so we are trying to touch on a lot. And what we did in writing this one was try to find the real touchstone items that we think need to be involved in sustainability as a process. And we call it a process, not as a thing. It's not an end result. So it's a process of teaching, learning, researching, and operating that does these things. But we also, per the request of the sponsors, tried to situate this at UW-Madison in the space of higher education to the extent that we could, acknowledging, of course, that the work we do, we want it to impact, climate results. We want it to impact things happening across the state. So we can't limit it to being only the facilities on campus, for example, or only educational outcomes coming out of specific classes. We want it to be bigger than that. It's a very challenging thing to do well. Okay, now I'll be quiet. I think I saw Jocelyn and then Sarah.
Sarah was first.
Go, Sarah.
It's very important to have something this detailed as a foundational document and as a reference document. If I had one of my alumni advisory council members say, Sarah, what is UW-Madison? What does sustainability mean at UW-Madison? I'm going to be honest, there's absolutely no way I'm going to recite this to them. And so when I'm looking at this, this is where academia clashes with consumer and end user and the constituents whose behavior we need to change and whose affinity and buy-in we need. So I would really push us to get to a snackable, and it's embedded in there, and this might not be the right thing, but I think you could take the phrase and say, for those of us working on sustainability work groups, we are all trying to implement things that will achieve equitable, just, and healthy management of our planetary environment to ensure thriving of future generations. One sentence. So all the rest is just the how or the nuance, but somewhere you got to have a thesis phrase, a core what are we about that we can all say and recite frequently, or it's going to be super hard for work groups to move ahead on taking action and doing what you need them to do. We just can't get ourselves bogged down. This is important, foundational, but this isn't the be all and end all. And to Cheryl's point, there's got to be a so what for what question that we can ask and answer immediately to be our best at.
Brilliant point. And I was actually looking at that exact same section of the phrasing as the potential pullout as you started talking. So go ahead, Jocelyn.
Well, Sarah just said it much better, but essentially there needs to be one statement, and then this is a embellishment on that. But I think what we were hearing from leadership was that they need it like the key thing. And so I think what you pulled out, and also what Sarah pulled out as a focus to build on, would be a good direction. Can keep all this, but we need that that headline that people can associate with. And also, I'm not convinced on the process. I'm not convinced that it's a process, because I think that suggests to me that we're content to just be processing and not to become sustainable or more sustainable. So my 2 cents.
Yeah, more great points. I think, the only defense I would make of the detail stuff is not that we would include it in any kind of external comms, or even, or at least not primarily, or that it would be the snackable phrase. By the way, Sarah, you've now instilled that in our lexicon for all of time. But that I do think that there are ways in which the sponsors were asking for both, because sometimes we would say, here's something that we want to do, and we're calling it sustainability, and the feedback might be, is that really sustainability? And so, although I think the phrasing, equitable, just, and healthy management of our planetary environment now and for the future, that kind of thing, does sum it up really well, and that's probably what we should go with. What does that mean? Also has to be there in some document. So I think that's where I'm kind of going on that guiding document thing. Mark, and then Ashley.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm tied to the word process. When I think about process, though, that's saying that it's iterative, that we learn as we go, that it's changing, that it's evolving. Right? What we think is sustainable today, I hope it pales in comparison to what we think is sustainable 25 years from now. Right? So that's what I think about process, is that it's constantly evolving, but I'm not tied to the word process.
There's also a little nuance here probably between what sustainability is and sustainable is. And yeah, that's part of what we're teetering on, I think, in terms of whether it's a process or not. Go ahead, Ashley.
Yeah, I would definitely, I think I agree that for me, I personally like the word process in this, in that like, it's a continual like striving for sustainability, and it's not like a one and done thing that we can really like achieve and then be done with. It's like it needs to be continually worked on, and like that's like the definition of sustainability, is that like it is something that is continual. But anyway, I just wanted to say that the subcommittee did meet and like talk about our different opinions and things we liked and didn't like about the definition. And one of the like main things that we brought up was that like it definitely, this definition of sustainability definitely like pertains to like healthy management of our planetary environment. And that's very like a point that's stressed well. But then something that's not really stated is like, why is sustainability important for humans? If that makes sense. And I think that like adding something in about that emphasizes how like sustainability is not just for like planetary health, but it's also for like the survival of humans, and that like without sustainability, like it's not just the planet that is going to not survive, but it's also humans. And so I think stressing the necessity of sustainability for the human race, I think, is something that the subcommittee wanted to see in this definition. And like, yeah, like kind of an argument as to like why this is so important for UW as an institution, and also like tying that together with like the Wisconsin idea. Yeah. Oh, another thing they said was also reducing the amount of times we use the word sustainability in like actually explaining like what the word means instead of just like using it a bunch of times. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashley. I think as an initial set of thoughts, I would say that that's a really good point. I in helping to draft this, saying management of our planetary environment, I honestly cringed a little because I was like, oh, this is going to be too ecocentric. And that's where it was sort of leaning hard on these ideas of the management of it has to be equitable, e.g. of humans, just to humans, healthy for humans. And, we try to kind of underscore that in some of the bullets. But that may still not be clear enough. And I think we, certainly take your feedback. And the subcommittee's feedback. Well, as part of this discussion, we kind of were hoping to get to a high sign. Oh, sorry to have you go, Sarah, but thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Mark may volunteer you, but we won't. So I wanted to say, we kind of wanted to come away feeling like we got a high sign from you all as to whether or not we should move forward or not here. And we had queued up a potential poll to get a kind of sense, but my feeling is the poll is probably not super useful. You all have brought some really important nuance to this conversation. My thought is, we will return as a group and work on this a little bit and both come out with a kind of the one-liner, hopefully the snackable piece, and then the full meal will also develop some of our culinary techniques a bit and try to produce something that is a little bit more to your taste. Here's my extended metaphor for the day. Does that sound okay to everyone? Does that sound like a good next step? Great.
Can I make one last comment?
Of course.
So I'm now sitting here thinking, the provost and Rob Kramer said, what is the definition at UW-Madison? How is it unique? What are we doing here that's different? That's how I took that also. And I'm not quite sure that we could put in any university's name in this probably at this point, right? So there's nothing there that talks about something unique about either I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's we were proud of the fact that the Nelson Institute is here, or Earth Day started here, or all those some little tidbit that ties it to our commitment to that. I don't know where to go with that, but
I think it's a good point, and it's it is true. There's something kind of generalized about this, even though we're trying to make it specific.
Yeah.
The one point I might offer is that when this group EAB reviewed the report, one of the things they pointed to was that we were basically, our report and our plans were pretty well on par with our other peer institutions. One of the ways in which we stood out was in our greater focus on social sustainability. And I do think we pull that out in this definition. So even though it may not be kind of overtly tied to kind of being a badger or something like that, there is a way in which defining it in this way is actually separating us a little bit from some other definitions. I just as a piece of context, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to hear. Okay.
And it's not to say that others are not including that, but I think we're trying to make it even more central. All right, well, we'll more stay tuned is I think the takeaway here. Thank you so much for these great feedback. Should we move on to the next stuff? All right, you got to listen to me for a little bit longer here. So the point about communications, marketing, and so on has come up several times, and I think appropriately so in this conversation. What we wanted to do for this last chunk was to suggest a few ways in which we might offer you support in terms of communicating the outcomes of this process, and also in doing so, ask you to suggest anything back to us about how we might best support you. So we will be doing proactive communications in various capacities, but we also want to make sure that you feel equipped to talk about this work and the eventual kind of finalized recommendations and action groups, and also that your units and teams and departments do. And so once we've been approved, hopefully by the sponsors, we could do things like provide individual talking points to you, sort of tailored to your units or departments, the kind of work that you do, and maybe if you are working on one of these action groups, tying that into. Another, of course, is to make contact with your comms team. We will be working with UCOM regardless, but I think individual teams are also going to be important to loop in here. We might send you language to include in emails to your staff or colleagues, both within and outside of the university. We might maintain an internal website and the drive for communication updates and materials. That might be a box folder or something like that. Certainly, we will be leveraging social media. You may have ideas of which social media are most important for your communities and audiences to hear from. And so maybe there's ways in which we can help kind of grease the skids there. And then, of course, keeping this whole team or this whole group of people in the loop on press releases, articles, and that sort of thing. So I think what we were going to do is do a quick poll and have you basically vote on the things that you think are the most important. And Alex, I can't remember whether you made them all possibly clickable or whether it was a rank order kind of deal.
You guys are letting us try out some things we haven't done a lot of, so bear with us, but it's a rank order thing. You go to pollev.com/AlexFrank053, and you basically just rank these in order, what you think is most. You can kind of click and drag and move them around. Thank you, Nathan.
So we're just trying to get a quick sense of what you all think are the most important things for us to be thinking about first, or primarily. I think we're going to do all of these at some level. Alex, I'm assuming you're going to see the results and tell me when we're ready to talk about them.
I think we should see them come up here.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Has anyone managed to do this successfully? Or is it just,
There
oh, there
we
they
go.
are. All right. All right, so, oh, moving around. I shouldn't jump in yet. All right, well, at the risk of rushing, I will consider this the kind of final results. Oh, see, they just moved again. Regardless, I think we have a general sense of kind of top three here. And this is quite helpful. So we can be thinking in terms to some extent of prioritizing our kind of communications and marketing materials and how we get them to you and at what point. I wanted to also ask, are there any other items that you think would be particularly important for us to work on from a communication standpoint, either ourselves or as material prep for you all? and your teams. I know we have at least one communications director on this call, so.
This is an idea that me and Natalie talked about earlier, and I think this may have been talked about also like last year, but maybe having some kind of event or like panel to kind of inform students and the broader Madison community about the Sustainability Advisory Council and like kind of the situation of what's being done, just so that everyone else on campus is aware of these efforts.
That's a great thought. Yeah. And hopefully we could maybe do this in person and make it a proper kind of celebratory sharing of this information rather than a Zoom call. Any other urgent ideas or thoughts for us to consider? All right. Well, Alex, I'm not sure if we had any other piece there. I think it's just handing it back to you. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, that's about wraps it up for today. I think we've already touched on the big next steps is us taking the great feedback we got today. And I want to truly thank you all for the really helpful feedback. This felt very productive from my end, speaking purposely. So I really appreciate you thinking thoughtfully about this. So I think we have the to-do to incorporate these edits and turn it back to y'all for further review and make sure we're properly addressing what we heard before sharing anything further with the sponsors. I think I also warned you that you'll probably also see maybe an email invite or scheduling for a one-on-one discussion on some of the specifics and some of your areas of expertise. And then probably a next meeting in January. In the meantime, you'll see email back and forth in those one-on-one meetings. But other than that, that's all we had for today. Nothing else from everyone. Thank you